Hi, welcome everybody to our last Cavly conversation on science communication for the semester. My name's Dan Fagan. I'm a professor of journalism here at NYU and the director of the Science, Health, and Environmental Reporting Program and the Science Communication Workshops. We care a lot about science communication at NYU. And we are thrilled to have two wonderful guests with us to talk about creepy crawlies and other living things that, for really very limited and limiting reasons, we tend to regard negatively. But actually, there are really great stories embedded in the idea of reassessing this animal wildlife. So it's a great topic, and our tour guide tonight will be Robin Lloyd, who is a distinguished writer in residence here, a distinguished scholar here at NYU. And in addition is, let's see, the chair of the Council on Science Writing. I think I've got that right. Anyway, Robin is a senior person in the science journalism firmament, and we're very glad to have her. So with that, take it away, Rob.
Thank you, Dan. It's really nice to see everyone here. Welcome to everyone online. Thank you, Dan. It's really nice to see everyone here, and welcome to everyone online. I've wanted to have this conversation, particularly with our wonderful guests tonight, for a long time, actually. And the stars aligned, and we were able to make this happen. And the reason I was really interested in this is that for years, as an assigning editor, and also as a writer myself, I've found that I'm really drawn to writing about animals, all animals, any animals. I'm just, I just have this affinity for animals, but there's a tension, and the tension is that a lot of editors are reluctant to make those assignments, particularly about so-called non-charismatic animals, or animals that aren't mammals, maybe birds, unless you work for an animal-specific publication. And guess what? There aren't a lot of those. So it becomes difficult to get those assignments, I find, and people who want to write about this have a more of an uphill battle, I think, getting those assignments. So what we have today is guests who have overcome these hurdles with remarkable agility and skill, and they have figured out how to get long-term contracts writing about insects, bugs, and other invertebrate animals and other species that are so-called unloved, or they have gotten a book contract, for instance, writing about creepy, crawly, sticky, disgusting, unwanted, or unloved, or potentially unloved animals. So how did they do it, and why? That's what I would love to talk about today. What are the best techniques for getting these assignments and making them resonate with readers? Because ultimately, of course, we want to make sure that our pieces resonate with our readers, and once we can convince ourselves that our readers are interested in this, we can make a good pitch to our editor and get some editors to start turning around and making more of these assignments. So our two guests today, Dr. Gwen Pearson is an award-winning freelance science writer and former education coordinator in the Department of Entomology at Purdue University. Gwen has held a number of excellent academic positions, primarily doing outreach and education efforts. One of those was at Albion College as a biology professor in 1996, where she served pizza that included insects as an ingredient, insect flour, basically. And in a few years later after that, Gwen started blogging under the pseudonym Bug Girl. So if you ever wanted to see Bug Girl in person or on a live stream, you finally get the opportunity. At that time, her writing ranked in the top 50 science blogs globally during one period of time then. And then in the teens, she started writing the charismatic mini fauna tri-weekly public post on Wired. That was from 2013 to 2016, and she's written a lot of other places as well. Her freelance science writing career includes bylines at the Washington Post, Science, Highlights for Children, and she also ran a bug zoo, I just learned recently. So ask about running a bug zoo. And apparently there's a bug zoo down at the AM&H right now, down the street, so in Manhattan, which these folks had a behind-the-scenes tour today, I hear. So, and we also are very lucky today to have Dr. Bethany Brookshire with us. I'm just doing doctor today, just for the introductions briefly, because they both have PhDs, and that's kind of interesting, right, for career trajectories. We don't usually have two PhD science writers, science journalists here, so that's kind of neat. Anyway, Bethany Brookshire is a freelance science journalist and author of the book Pests: How Humans Create Animal Villains. Great title. She also hosted and produced the podcast Science for the People from 2009 until last year. What a run. That is a long podcast run. She is a former staff writer with Science News Magazine and Science News for Students. Bethany's freelance writing has appeared in Scientific American, Science News Magazine, Science News Explorers, The Atlantic, Washington Post, etc. And Bethany's PhD, Gwen's PhD is entomology, basically. Yeah, right, correct. And Bethany's PhD is physiology and pharmacology. So let me proceed to just first ask you, okay, overly established that you both have doctorates in biology, broadly speaking. Both of you have published academic research. I went on Google Scholar, yes, indeed. And both of you eventually became science communities and biology bloggers, and then eventually independent science writers, science journalists. Could each of you describe your paths from PhD to science writing about animals in a little more detail?
You're looking at me. Okay.
Because you should go first.
You should go first.
No.
Oh. Okay then. So basically I made a whole bunch of really terrible decisions and it turned out great. And that is honestly the story of my entire career path. So I have had a lot of, I've been in and out of academia. The one theme is definitely education and outreach. And for a while, I was a high-level administrator at a research station. And I was a high enough level administrator that I was covered under a state law that said I was not allowed to have public opinions. Anyone who knows me knows I have opinions. And so I started blogging under a pseudonym, and amazingly, it really took off. I never expected that many people would want to read about bugs. And it also, the nice thing about having a pseudonym when I was learning how to write was that no one knew who I was when I messed up. And so somehow I just happened to, I was explaining to somebody earlier today, I was doing a stand-up routine about pubic lice, as one does. And it just so happened that in the audience, we had Ed Yong, Carl Zimmer, and is Adam Rogers, who was at the time the editor of Wired. And shortly after that, I got an offer to write at Wired. So there you go. And they were fantastic, and they let me write about what I wanted to write about, which was just weird things. And one of the things I really like is writing sort of useful news. There's a lot of things that people just don't know that are really useful. And so things like if you have honey in a jar and it goes all crystallized, it's still edible. Don't throw it out. It's actually more delicious that way. And so things that you would know if you were a pointy-headed bug nerd, but not things that you would know normally. Or also the one about caffeinated underpants I really enjoyed writing. Don't buy them. So, and from there, I freelanced for a while and kind of, again, I needed insurance, so I went back to academia and I just couldn't take it. So now I'm back freelancing full time, so there you go.
And Bethany, from pharmacology and neuroscience to pests, tell us more.
Yeah, so I I refer to my life as a series of failures that have turned out okay. I'm feeling pretty good. But each one was a deep existential crisis. So basically, I wanted to be an ecologist most of my life. I went through the marine biology phase that like every millennial girly apparently went through, but I did not get over it, except that freshwater ecology was very much my jam. And I studied that in college, and I went to my advisor, and I was like, I really want to go to grad school and study aquatic ecology. And he said, yeah, so your GPA sucks. And I was like, you have a point. And he said, so I don't think you can get into any programs in aquatic ecology. Like, they're way too competitive. But the NIH has just doubled the budget, so their standards are lower, so you should try biomedical science. I am not kidding. So I got actually several offers for grad school, and I went to grad school in pharmacology. The reason I actually went to grad school in pharmacology is because they offered me a free laptop. I am not kidding. I do not recommend my method of decision making to pretty much anyone. Anyway, I ended up studying addictive drugs of various types for my PhD. It was fascinating. It was amazing. I don't regret it. But I did have a problem during my PhD studies. I hit this kind of point of existential crisis. Do we have any science grad students here by any chance? Hey. Okay, so once you pass your quals, and get into from the master's into the PhD stage, there is a point that I like to refer to as the post-quals slump. This is the point where all the things that were working suddenly cease to work for no discernible reason. Personally, my high-performance liquid chromatography machine acquired demons at some point. And during this time, I began to think about alternative careers. And so I snuck out of the lab one day and went to an alternative careers seminar. I sat down with an editor at Scientific American and asked if I could write for Scientific American. It was John Rennie. He did not laugh in my face because he's really nice. Instead, he said, maybe you should start a blog instead. And I did. I did. It turned out I was kind of okay at it. And so I ended up actually blogging about 3 times a week on average through my PhD and through 3 years of a postdoc, which I do not recommend. In part because I was very underslept, and in part because, as my PhD, as my postdoc advisor told me, nights and weekends are when you should be writing grants. He was not wrong. Anyway, I did a postdoc, and then I tried the tenure track. I failed spectacularly. I received 1 job offer. It was for a college that will remain unnamed for reasons which will shortly become very clear. It was for a part-time teaching job, 3-3 course load, half research, half service, no funding, $25,000 a year, and they hoped I had another job. When I turned them down, the head of the department called me and told me I was making the biggest mistake of my life. I felt pretty okay, actually. And so I ended up flailing around for a little while, doing some freelancing. I actually did a brief internship for the Office of Science and Technology Policy for the Democrats, enough to figure out that I do not respect authority enough to work in government. Luckily, 6 weeks later, I got a job at Science News magazine, and I was out. And Science News was amazing. I just want to give a shout out to Janet Roloff, who is the editor-in-chief of Science News Explores, which is the student arm of Science News magazine. She trained me from the ground up, because for all that I had been blogging, I did not know the first thing about reporting. I didn't know the first thing about structure. I didn't know the first thing about narrative. I knew nothing about nothing. And she was an incredible mentor and a wonderful friend. And so that's why I need an extension on that feature, Janet. Anyway, so I worked there for about 7 years, and then I was very lucky that I got a fellowship at MIT, the Knight Science Journalism Fellowship, and I got to pursue the idea of writing a book, because over that time, I moved from kind of writing about kind of neuroscience-specific topics, which was my training, into much more of a broad beat kind of all general science, including string theory and quantum teleportation for children. And then began to realize that I could pursue my love of ecology again. And it was wonderful. So I got to attend MIT. Unfortunately, the year that I attended MIT was the 2019-2020 academic year. So you can imagine what happened. That's okay. I still managed to get a book proposal out of it. The experience was wonderful. I wrote the book pests, and now I'm a freelancer. And, you know, it turned out all right, I guess.
Thanks for explaining this. So there are a lot of really common messages, angles, and tropes that occur in writing about animals, and let me recite a couple of them. These animals are really weird and cool. These animals are threatened with extinction. These animals are smart, actually. These animals make art, actually. Let's save the ecosystem, not just the species, or let's save the species and the individuals. Or these animals are actually charismatic and you should like them. So you too haven't done that. You have a different strategy. Have you got words to describe that strategy? Is there something that you have in mind? I mean, it feels like it's different.
I do. Mostly because I had a whole book to figure it out. So the way that I approach writing about animals is particularly through the lens of human-wildlife interactions, because the reality is we are always in the process of perceiving and judging our world, right? And that includes the animals that we interact with. There is no animal that is good. There is no animal that's bad. There's no animal that's disgusting. There's no animal that is a pest. All of those things are judgments that we put on them, that we decided that they are. And those decisions that we make are reflections of what we want and what we believe about the world we live in. And so that's kind of the angle that I've chosen to think about wildlife as we interact with it, is to say, what does this animal and our understanding of it and our scientific understanding and our traditional ecological knowledge understanding of these animals, what does that mean about us? What does it mean about how we see the world? Because the reality is we can never see the world the way an animal sees it. We can only see the world the way we do. And so I think it's more, it adds another level for us to realize that actually we are seeing things through this very biased lens. That doesn't mean we don't know anything, but it means that we need to kind of be cognizant about how these animals are really about us.
Nice, thank you. Gwen, let me read some of the titles. I mean, I know you know, some of you are wired. This is great. So, 50 Shades, these are some of the headlines from Charismatic Microfauna. 50 Shades of Wrong, Disturbing Insect Sex. Giant stick insects from Vietnam. 4-acre spider web engulfs building. Sharks aren't in the Great Lakes, but testicle-nipping fish are. Bats have sparkly poop. So I think I'm priming you to describe your strategy here.
We are all 12 inside.
Could you say a little more?
No, that's pretty much it. I think it's a combination of things. Some of it is trying to get folks to think a little more. So, like, we'll use our testicle nipping fish.
Apologies to any children.
I was just about to say, and I just now remembered this was supposed to be kid-friendly.
It's okay, testicle is an anatomical term.
Yes.
I believe in this child.
Moving on. So there, people were freaking out about, oh, yeah, piranhas, ooh, and I'm like, no, really, the thing you need to be freaking out about is this other fish that you've never heard of, which has been released by pets. So it starts out as a pet, and people release it into the wild. And so that is an issue for so many invasive animals. It's a huge issue, especially for invertebrates. But also, like goldfish. goldfish, when you release them in a pond, get extremely large. Because, and so it's a common issue. It's an ecological issue. But would you read that story if I didn't have testicle nipping fish in the headline? No, you would not. And so kind of using that, oh my goodness, sort of headline, which again, Wired let me write a lot of my headlines. They only tweaked it a little bit. They were very nice about that. And so that is what gets somebody in as the hook. And then I can hit you with and by the way, don't release your pets.
Bethany, there was definitely some squeamish material, and certainly, just objectively, disturbing material in the book about how humans and pests interact.
There
or
was?
Animals. For me.
Oh,
For me.
I'm sorry.
And why? Why do you write about topics why in this book did you embrace, is it for the same reason that you embrace some of these details that make me and a lot of people, I would argue, squeamish?
Was it the snakes or the elephant repellent? Or the poop? Was it the poop?
Yes.
Okay. I think I like to embrace all of those things because it's all relatable. Everybody poops, I think that kind of helps bring people together in a way. I also, it's a great way to bring in interest, but it's also a great way for us to recognize, again, the subjectivity of what is going on. Because the things that we often consider disgusting, right? There are people who really, really hate pigeons. They consider them disgusting. There are people who really, really hate rats. They consider them disgusting, right? There are plenty of things that humans do that are disgusting, and so I think it helps to kind of recognize that disgusting is a label that we've put on these animals based on things that are important to us. And some of those things are biological. So for example, disgust is one of the fundamental emotions. There's a varying number of fundamental emotions, but disgust is always one. And it's a very important emotion that is in my favorite Freudian phrase of all time about oral rejection. Psychologists say this with a straight face, and I love them for it. Oral rejection, which is basically, this is bad, it's going to make me sick, get it out of my mouth. And so there's this universal expression of disgust, which basically comes down to, yeah. And that is a fundamental emotion, but it's also important to recognize that not every species feels disgust around the same things. So for example, one of my favorite examples of this is coprophagy, aka the eating of poo. And humans do not do this. It is one of the very few things that is universal about human societies. We do not eat human poo. We are very rare, extremely rare. Most mammals will chow down on some poo if given the chance. It's a very available source of nutrients, right? In some cases, animals have to do that to actually get the second pass digestion. And I think it's important for us to recognize that even things that we consider universal are not actually universal, right? There's one in every family. We're the one in our family that doesn't eat poo. And maybe for that, we're the ones who are disgusting.
So should we be convincing our editors that we need more? How did you get that book contract? How did you get? I mean,
my agent, her name is Alice. She's amazing. That's the short answer. I think the thing for me was that the angle was relatively new. I think a lot of people don't think about how subjective it is, that our hatred is subjective, right? We're all the heroes of our own stories. We all want to believe that our hate is the one true hate. And it was also, there's a lot of parts of the book that are potentially controversial, which I'm sure is part of the appeal. So for example, there is an entire chapter on cats. I have 2 cats. My cats are both former ferals who I kidnapped from the outdoors and brought into my home. To be fair, they were sitting on my back porch basically asking for it. And I adore them deeply. I love cats. Cats are responsible for the extinction of 63 species and counting. And that is an awkward thing for us to face, right? Because we love cats. They're so cute. And similarly, I also have a whole chapter on elephants, which, people, especially people in what we call the global north, love elephants. They are beautiful. They are wise. They are peaceful. They are indeed all of those things except possibly peaceful, because a male elephant in must is not peaceful. But they are wonderful and incredibly intelligent, and they have complicated social structures, and they are really beautiful creatures. And in West Africa alone, they kill more than 200 people a year and cause millions of dollars in crop damages. And I feel it's important for us to recognize the subjectivity, not just of our hate, but also of our love. And so I think maybe that was the angle that did it. I don't know. You'd have to ask my editor.
No, it was illuminating I really had my perspective shifted reading the book, because it was all about the social construction of all of this. It, to me, was a sociology book as much as a biology book, and my background was sociology. So it was head turning. I loved it. Thank you. So we've decided, okay, here's a strategy that is winning. Embrace your inner 12-year-old, right? Everybody has the inner 12-year-old. Go for the gross, mind that. Are there any mistakes that you have made, maybe you haven't, in writing about creepy, crawly, unloved animals? Is there any advice you would have? Don't do this.
I've got one. Always check your humor, because sometimes something that you think is really funny and you think is innocent and you think has no possible connection to anything that could possibly be bad is in fact deeply offensive to somebody, and you just don't know. Because in your case, or in my case, you're a white lady. And I have an example of this. So I was covering a very recent study that came out showing that crocodiles can recognize the cries of babies, mammal babies, human babies. And female crocodiles will actually approach speakers playing cries of sad human babies. And when I originally covered this, I was like, this is wild. I was boggled. I was mildly entertained. No babies were harmed of any species in the making of this paper. And then, only after I talked about it and I laughed about it, did I receive an email. Okay, people are terrible, because apparently it is a thing that people used to joke in the Jim Crow South about feeding black babies to alligators. And no, it was horrible. And I had no idea. I'd never heard this in my life. The authors of the study were from Belgium. They'd never heard this in their lives. They had no clue. It turns out it's not even limited to there. There are some, for example, experiences of people during the British colonization of India, where there are reports of people feeding babies to crocodiles. And I had no clue. And I had to issue an apology, obviously, because that was really inappropriate. And so I think, it's so fun to laugh at things that are disgusting and weird and out there. And it's hard to believe that sometimes these things have horrible pasts. And so I think that's probably the biggest mistake I've made recently. I make a lot of mistakes, but that would be the biggest one recently.
But there is a lot of humor in both of your writing. Yeah. So let me read one of. I'm going to read you, Gwen. All right. Okay. So this is a story about uterine vellum, which is basically parchment paper that was used as paper to copy down medieval illustrated manuscripts in Europe, for instance. So this story, the question was, okay, is this vellum, is this material that was written on, is it from uteruses or not, and whose uteruses? What you know? So basically, the question is, and this I think this is right from this is a quote I think. Was the uterine vellum actually uterine? And then this was the brilliant sentence. It turns out that monks probably weren't illuminating uteruses. I thought that was pretty good. That was pretty clever. I was caught off guard and laughed out loud. That was nice. So, Gwen, you do use humor a lot. So, I mean, Bethany, you were saying keep it in check. So there is a line, I guess?
There's a line, and for journalists in particular, sensitivity readers are your friend. I had 6 sensitivity readers for my book, and I appreciate them all so much. Because I wanted to make sure that I was covering things in ways that were accurate, that were sensitive, and that my humor was not misplaced. And there were actually some jokes that I ended up taking out because one of my sensitivity readers was like, so, you know, I, from my indigenous nation, think that's funny, but they might not. Better safe than sorry.
And editors are your friend. So I would say the one story I had that was probably I walked closest to the line was one about spider venom being used as a Viagra replacement. So of course I made every penis joke you can possibly make, but I also wanted to be extremely sensitive because erectile dysfunction is a huge problem, and it is a problem that honestly, as you get older, the percent odds that you will have it increases radically. And so for that one, I definitely had, and I said, there was also how they do research on that is really disturbing. It's a lot of decapitated parts. And so
Decapitated spider parts?
No.
Oh.
Right. Yes.
Oh dear.
And surprisingly, nobody involved in the research wanted to talk to me about how they obtained the penises, which I think is fair. If somebody called me up on the phone and asked me questions about that, I would not answer it either. But for that, I definitely had 2 men read it because I wanted to be really clear, like this is not an organ I have to deal with. I want to make sure that I'm not trivializing a serious concern for many people. And that also, it reads as funny to me, but I identify as a woman. And so I may not be the best judge. And so for that story, it turned out okay. But it was a topic that really clearly I wanted to be very sensitive about. Well, I made all my really rude jokes.
Was there stiff competition for the puns? I'm sorry.
I like to think it was a seminal piece of writing.
Thank you. Too easy. All right. Nah, you got a lot of laughs. It's good. So let's talk about one of the major takeaways of Bethany's book, I think. As I understand it, you had, dozens of examples of how efforts to eradicate animals that have been framed, identified as pests, as opposition, as get away from me in a particular society or community, that eradication doesn't work, or that it doesn't work very well, or it has unintended consequences, it doesn't work in the long run, it does not have satisfactory outcomes. And the solution, however, you did have a lot of nice solutions in there, and the solution is basically coexistence. And you did a great job of elaborating this beyond, like the bumper sticker that says coexist and has all the symbols that, there's this, you use the word Dewey, maybe liberal perspective on coexisting with other species, right? So can you say more about what you mean by coexistence as a solution to dealing with animals we have an aversion to?
Yeah, so I was very lucky that I got to work with and form connections with members of indigenous groups for the reporting of this book. And I was very informed by some of the things that they taught me. That said, I don't speak for them. They don't speak for everyone in their group. Every person has their own takes on things. But I was very struck by something that Neil Patterson, who is a member of the Tuscarora, said. Oh no, it wasn't. Neil was talking to me about treaties. And he mentioned that when dealing with animals in their environments, the Tuscarora develop treaties. These are not written treaties. They have treaties with rocks. They have treaties with bears. They have treaties with deer, treaties with trees. These are not written. They are understandings about the relationship between the people who live in that area and the animal or tree or rock that is there too. And I found that such a wonderful example. And another example actually came from Joseph Marshall III, who is a member of the Red Bud Sioux, I believe. And he mentioned that when they talk about coexistence, what he said was, it did not mean that we were always pleased with each other, but it meant that we respected each other's right to be. And I found that so incredibly powerful, because when I say coexistence, I don't mean never kill a roach. Sorry.
It's okay.
I mean, we need to respect that we live here with them, and there are other ways to pursue this. There are ways to, sometimes you gotta go lethal, sometimes you do have to kill to eat, right? And sometimes there are other ways to live with these animals. Another great example came from one of the elders of the Diné, the Navajo, and he told me, you know, when a mouse goes in your house, he was like, yeah, I'm getting out the mouse trap. Like, of course, I'm getting out the mouse trap. But he said, the thing is that mouse is not just in your house bothering you. It's sending you a message. It is telling you to clean your house. It's telling you you have made a mistake. And that is what coexistence is about. It doesn't mean that it's always peaceful. It doesn't mean that this is peace and love and lions lying with lambs. It means that you understand more about the animals that you live with, and the way that you approach them is based on that understanding.
Gwen, you've written a lot about pest control efforts and studies that undermine, you know, well, whatever. They didn't set out to, but that demonstrate that a lot of these efforts are going to not produce the desired result. So is coexistence something that is a theme in your work as well?
Yeah, since you mentioned the 4-acre spider web, that was actually a really great example. That was actually a water treatment plant. So the spiders, if you have a spider in your house, it is there because there is a job to do. You have something for them to eat. And so all of those spiders, and it was a lot, man. It was a lot. Even for me, I was kind of like, whoa. Because all of that sewage treatment water was generating flies. Because there were that many spiders, they were eating all the flies, they were helping us. And that's kind of that getting a sense of this is their job. These animals are doing their job. And just like sometimes they're sending us a message, if the animal is a roach, then yes, you definitely need to clean.
Well, if you live in New York, that you live in New York. I feel like there's only so much you can do.
Yeah. Or some parts of North Carolina where I've been. Yeah, but I mean, ultimately, for many of these animals, there's a huge amount of fear, and for me, that's one of the biggest things, and it's a real focus of my work in education. In a lot of ways, I call myself a spider therapist, because a lot of what I do is hold these animals and then talk to people, talk through them to say, no, really, look, it's not doing anything, it's just sitting here, she's fine. And if you can do that, either by showing people, oh no, these spiders are doing a job, you know, or this bug looks kind of gross, but in nature, it's doing this thing for us that's really great. Like roaches, where they are supposed to be, are incredibly useful and valuable animals. They have social lives. And so they're quite interesting, and some of them are, you saw a cute roach today, didn't you?
Oh, I saw an adorable roach today.
Yeah. So it's kind of getting that sense of, okay, and what I usually think of it is, your space, defend your space, great. But outside, it's okay. Let them be. They're doing their thing.
The roach in question had little patterns that looked like question marks on its back. It was so cute.
Dan.
Well, first I just want to make 2 quick observations. This is definitely the most hilarious Cavly conversation in years so far, so keep it up. Secondly, I'm feeling really looks obsessed and shallow for spending the last 8 years of my life just totally enmeshed in the world of one of the only good-looking invertebrates. I'm feeling very like, what's wrong with you? What I really wanted to ask you, as a famous lepidopterist told me, if you took the wings off a monarch butterfly, everyone would just step on it, which is true. What I wanted to ask you about is, I think it's just a potential amazing fount of story ideas, is this idea of eradication, which you sort of got at. But here in New York City, the mayor appointed a rat czar, and which is just about the stupidest idea you can possibly imagine. And everyone is this idea of we're gonna poison our way out of the rat problem is still pretty. It definitely has still pretty wide following here in Rat Central, New York City. And I'm wondering, so there are amazing stories there, but I'm also wondering, what are the limits? To what extent is it going to be possible to tell those kinds of stories that this really hated creature, and rats are truly hated in New York City. There's really no competition for most hated. Well, Donald Trump is close, but rats definitely more hated.
Oh, no, you said rats. Rats are most hated.
Yeah,
that works.
I would still give it to rats. And so there's really a limit to to stories that can portray rats as sympathetic figures, but it is possible, I think, to portray rats as sort of wily, cohabitants that we need to figure out a different approach to. I don't know. So I guess I would just love to hear you both sort of riff on rats as a potential source of great stories, and also just sort of a fundamental rethinking of how we live with supposedly noxious creatures.
Okay. So I have a whole chapter on rats. And most particularly the chapter on rats is about disgust, and why we find rats disgusting. And one of the things that I found in my research is that the reason we primarily find rats disgusting is because of what they are associated with, right? They are associated with trash. They are associated with places where sanitation is not kept up. They are associated with poor housing. They are associated with poverty. They are associated with unhoused populations. Rats are not an issue of just a gross animal skittering on the sidewalk. They are an issue of social justice. And they are an issue of how we live together in a city and make sure that everyone in that city is cared for. And so when you see rats, when you see really major rat infestations, and for the book I actually did reporting with some people who were working in unhoused encampments in Seattle, and I have never seen a rat infestation that bad, and I have done a rat tour of New York City with Bobby Corrigan, and he's like the rat dude, the rat god. And I've never seen a rat infestation as bad as the one I saw in Seattle. And it was very clear that no one wanted to live that way, but they did not have a choice. And so I think the way to approach better kind of taking care of the rat problem is to acknowledge that a rat problem is a social justice problem. A rat problem is because New York City does not have adequate sanitation, because we're still putting our trash out in nice big chewable plastic bags. And then we're leaving it there all night. And then we're like, ew, why are all these rats here? And then we're like, wait, you want to put a big trash can and take up our parking space? Something has to give. I actually have been, I will say, when I heard there was going to be a rat czar, I was intensely skeptical, as you might imagine. But I have grown a little more optimistic, in part because I have seen that the latest kind of efforts to look at rodent control have actually taken the approach of saying we need to fix the sanitation in New York City. We need to cut back the undergrowth, right? I think another thing that people don't think about when they think about rats in particular, we think about rats and we don't think about why the rats are there. We think that they are there and we think that we hate it. We do not consider what rats need. We do not consider what rats want. When you start thinking about why a rat is where it is, rats need food, rats need water, rats need a place to call home. Okay? New York City supplies all of these things in abundance. There are ways to control all of these things. You control the food by controlling the sanitation. The water, I will admit, is a bit of a hopeless case. But you can control the food and you can control the harborage, right? You can control where rats are building their homes, because you need to understand they want to make homes in corners. They want to make homes under nice leafy foliage, right? Ground covering ivy, pachysandra, all that kind of stuff. All of those plants are there because we decided they looked nice in landscaping. We could make different choices. And I think those are things that we need to think about as we think about dealing with rats. I will say, if we declare war on the rat, we will never win. Never. All we can do is work to reduce their numbers, work to reduce their impact on our lives. And the way that we do that is kind of seeing them not for the things skittering across the sidewalk, but for what they represent about our society.
Gwen, you've written about some pretty non-charismatic animals, maggots, snow fleas. Looking here, let's see, the spider-eating bone house wasp. Caterpillars, yeah, we did that. So do you think there's a limit?
A limit to...
Well, Dan was saying maybe there are things that are just too hated for us to do an effective job of writing like relatable copy that is, yeah, something readers want to read about.
Yeah, I think ultimately, if you're going to write about something like a rat, or I will also throw in lice or bed bugs, which are also social, basically, a social issue. Bed bugs are hugely expensive to eradicate, which means only really rich people can afford those really intense treatments.
And they're psychologically damaging.
They are devastating.
They are really devastating.
They are devastating. Lice also is a huge issue, and that is one that if you do not have a lot of available cash, it's going to be very, very difficult to get rid of them. And if you are unhoused, it's very serious. So part of that is pointing out that, hey, this thing you don't like, here's how we're going to have to solve it, and that's going to be difficult. And acknowledging, like, this isn't going to be easy. The only way you're going to have progress is you're going to have to give up street parking, you know, if you really want to do something about the rats. And that is a hard sell. on the other hand, if you can show and use the people who have these issues, so show the human side of that. So I want to tell a story about somebody in my family, but I think she might kill me. But let's just say someone who I am related to, her kids got lice, and it was really upsetting for her because she did not expect that. And talking about how that makes people feel, that's something that makes a story compelling, and I really struggled, we struggled with this, we thought we got rid of them, they came back. And so showing that here's the person, because if you can write a story that is just about an insect, especially like, if it's one that accidentally has 6 extra pairs of genitals. But for the most part, that is still a story about us, right? Because we're interested in it because sex, right? And so if you're telling a story about something that is less attractive, if you make it a story about people and how people relate to it, or the scientists that are studying it, sometimes, honestly, I'll be very honest, entomologists are usually extremely entertaining. I mean, we study bugs for our whole lives.
I covet that cardigan. It's amazing.
My entire closet looks like if Ms. Frizzle was an entomologist. So I think if you can put that human piece in there to make it a story about a person or people, then it will work.
And I just wanted to add, there's also something that I like to do is flipping perspective, right? And think about, I was talking with Dan about this before. As part of my work for the book, I read Derrida, who is a philosopher, and he gave a famous 10-hour lecture based on the concept of how he felt when his cat saw him naked. I'm quite serious. It was incredibly well received. It was published in several languages. Because philosophers, right? But it's a very important argument, because the argument he's making is that he cannot say what the cat sees, right? The cat could be looking and going, oh my goodness, why are you taking your fur off? Ew, weird. A roach or like a millipede might look at us and be like, 2 legs, that is disgusting. Have you seen the way they move? Oh. And I think flipping that perspective can kind of help us realize that this is coming from us, right? The animals that bother us are because we're bothered. And there's more than one way to see that,
Thanks. There was a question?
Okay. Hi. So I'm Gayang. I'm here at the Science Journalism program, and I studied philosophy in undergrad, so I commend you for getting through Derrida.
In 2 languages. I read it in English and French.
That's amazing. He's boring in both.
Oh!
Your question?
And I also wanted to say that I also like looking at roaches and comparing. So anyway, you're not alone in that. But I also really appreciated how you guys are kind of discussing, basically, in the end, what we see from these animals and bugs are things that we project upon them, like the other, right? The other entity. And we also, in the previous question, we also covered like a lot of different aspects of reporting on them, from them being some kind of representation of a social issue, and also just helping readers to like them more or to sympathize with them a little bit more. And I think listening to that, I was just wondering, like, what do you think comes first? So is it that when we're reporting about it, should we focus on, making it so that these rats or bugs are received better by society, like help readers sort of like perceive them in a better light and be more sympathetic? Or do we just jump straight to the point and kind of get to like where they really connect in sort of like societal problems?
That's a good question.
That's a very good question. I think, to me, it depends on the story, on the species in question. I think throughout all of my reporting on human-animal interactions, I have found myself constantly questioning my own biases. Even when I think I have discovered a new, like, oh, I've already gotten rid of my bias, I have not. And so I think that's always something that I try to keep in mind, that I am always seeing the world through the lens of my own biases. And sometimes those biases are shared by my audience. Sometimes they are not. And so I think questioning those can be really helpful in figuring out how you approach covering different animals.
Do you have thoughts on that?
That's a hard question. I think there's two things I would say about that. The first one is I'm being very conscious that, I'm sorry, Americans are just weird about bugs. If you go anywhere else in the world, people are not as phobic as
Also
they are
super
here.
weird about snakes, like roll weird about snakes.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at other cultures, including Native American cultures, insects are in so many creation myths, so many, because people understand they're really important. And so, but somehow in the United States, we have just become really, there's just so much fear. There's so much fear. And so keeping that in mind, I mean, that's part of the reason why I fed people insects. So entomophagy is basically eating insects. It's kind of having a little bit of a resurgence right now, because honestly, pretty much everywhere else in the world, people eat insects. They're just land shrimp. It's perfectly fine. And so some of it is to normalize, like, hey, did you know this is a delicacy pretty much everywhere else? But the other part of that, I think, is that it depends completely on the animal and the situation, and how you think people will receive it.
Thanks. Question?
Hi, thank you both for the laughs tonight. So I hope that this question both isn't too repetitive and also not too specific, but you've both talked a great deal about kind of the social associations with some of these so-called pests. I'm going to focus on pests with this question. But I haven't heard as much about the economic impacts of those, and that's one thing that, there's a story that I recently reported that had to do with pests and pest management, and it was covering this kind of new tool for pest management that does not involve pesticides and it's been used in East Africa for a very long time for another crop very effectively, but the question was, can this be effective for a different crop here in the US, where Western agriculture is a much different beast, and there's other factors there, and in our great capitalist society, a lot of those things don't jive. So for pests that are causing active economic damage and uprooting people's livelihoods, and that being the root cause of people's hatred toward that particular pest, in this case it was the Asian citrus psyllid. I've never heard anyone go, I hate Asian citrus psyllids, but and my editor also wanted to include jumping plant lice as part of that description, and I was like, I don't think we should do that, because then it associates it with lice, kind of like you both were saying. So I guess I'm just kind of curious, what some of the ways might be of avoiding villainizing those particular pests, while also not being insensitive to the fact that they are causing very active economic damage and really hurting people's livelihoods in a way where they have to completely, for a generational thing, has to all of a sudden they have to turn towards something else.
Let's talk about mosquitoes. Because that's the first thing that I think of because I cannot tell you how many people have come up to me and said, what's the point of mosquitoes? And I honestly don't know how to answer that, because, what's the point of me? And so, but absolutely, it's important for things that are pests to say, this is serious, this will harm people. Ticks are another big issue. And I'm not a fan of ticks, but they are kind of cool. But I don't think I will ever write a story. I can't envision a situation where I would write a story saying ticks are actually awesome. But I would write a story, and actually have written stories about here's how to protect yourself. There's some super interesting data about what plants you plant in your yard and how that affects tick populations, how much you mow your lawn. Spoiler, be lazy. So things that basically say, yeah, this is a problem, here's how you can handle it. Those stories are not hard to get somebody to buy into. There have been several stories recently about what's the point of mosquitoes, and those come around pretty constantly. But I haven't really seen them stick. I mean, there are mosquitoes that eat other mosquitoes. Mosquitoes are a major aquatic food source, but most readers are not going to get that. If I put it in Field and Stream, that would work. So a lot of it is also not just what the animal is, but also where it's going.
I would like to go from the very small here to the very large and talk about elephants. Because as I've mentioned before, elephants cause a truly significant amount of human suffering. And I think we are very hesitant to give credence to that. And that is not just reflected in kind of the way we talk about elephants. It is reflected in the straight up economics of how things are managed, for example, in Kenya with African elephant populations. So, for example, if you accidentally kill an African elephant in Kenya, like the elephant is raiding your crops, you accidentally kill it in an effort to drive it off. You will have life in prison. You will owe an amount of money that your family cannot ever possibly pay. If an elephant injures or kills a human, you can apply to the government for restitution. You will receive about 1/10 of the money that you would pay if you killed one. Human lives in Kenya are literally worth less than elephant lives. And like in straight economic terms. And you understand why the people who live with these creatures are not necessarily happy to see them. And that both helps you understand what's going on, and it also helps you, on the other hand, our love for these animals means that we approach their management in a highly informed way, right? People do not have an elephant raid their crops and shoot the elephant. There's no way they're going to do that. Instead, they erect electric fences, for example. They put up beehives because elephants really hate bees. They use elephant repellents, which I have smelled. They're extremely repellent. They will use drones. They will use ATVs. They will use chili balls. If any animal, honestly, ever learns to love spicy food, I can tell you right now, we are hosed. We're absolutely hosed. Chilies are our best protection. But it's very
From
interesting.
mammals.
Mammals, yes. Birds, I cannot help you. But I think that's something that we need to think about, is because we respect elephants the way that we in the global north do, it means that we approach their management in this very, very careful way, and in this very non-lethal way, and in this very educated way. We work really hard to gain loads of knowledge about these animals before we attempt to manage them. But often when it comes to rats, one of my sources, Neve Quinn, who's a wonderful pest management expert at UC Irvine, her favorite factoid is to tell people, we know more about the biology of the polar bear than we do about the city rat. Because the only thing we've ever cared about the city rat is how to kill it. And so I think it's worth thinking about how our views of these animals can change what we deem acceptable knowledge when it comes to their management, right? If we love an animal, we're going to learn a lot more about it before we try to take it out of our lives. And then not necessarily love, if we respect an animal, that really changes the effort we put into their management.
Thanks. Olivia?
Yeah, I mean, part of what I think is so appealing about both of your work is just like the weirdness and drawing out the wonder of these creatures. And so I have a question that's like the inverse of Marlowe's, but I'm wondering if you could just share like a creature that you think we should all be paying attention to, just and why it's fascinating you right now.
I love pigeons. I love them. They're my favorite pest. Don't tell the others. And the reason that I love them is because pigeons are such a wonderful reflection of us as people. Many people do not know that every pigeon on every city street in every city around the world is a feral domesticate. There are, I think, 2 remaining populations of wild pigeons, and one of them is disputed. We domesticated the pigeon around 8,000 years ago, and we used it for all of these awesome things. Pigeons make wonderful fertilizer. I'm very, very proud. Actually, I went to Morocco and I brought back a coat, which I am wearing today, which was tanned in the way they tanned leather in the 12th century, which is with pigeon poop. And it's buttery soft. The wonderful softness of poo. But we used pigeon poo for fertilizer. We used it for tanning leather. We used pigeons themselves as sources of food. We used pigeons as messengers for the young journalists in the room. The founding of modern journalism comes with Reuters and his flying of hot stock tips from Brussels, I think it was Brussels to Aachen, I want to say, using messenger pigeons. He could beat the train by 2 hours. We owe our entire profession to that guy and his pigeons. And I think, but now, of course, we hate them. And it's because pigeons are the outdated iPhone of the animal world. Okay? We used them for fertilizer. We have chemical fertilizer now. We used them for food. We have chicken. There's actually a wonderfully beautiful diverging graph where in the 1950s you can see the rise of the industrial chicken production along with a drop in local pigeon production. And of course, we don't have messenger pigeons anymore because we have the internet. And so the thing I love about urban pigeons is that we let them go and we declared that they were useless. And they stayed. Because they kept doing what pigeons do, right? Which is like going out, feeding themselves, coming back, making more pigeons. And now we hate them for it. And we used to love them for that. And so that I think is the thing that I love most about pigeons. Also, they're still really honestly very tame in many cases, to the point that at one point I sat in Father Demo Square in Manhattan and literally picked up a pigeon with my hands. And it just sat there in my hand and looked at me like, really? I put it down, no pigeons were harmed.
Did you have an answer, Gwen?
Every time I get asked a question like this, I just kind of freeze because 3/4 of this animals are insects. So there's a lot to pick from. So I'm just going to randomly pick cicadas because I think they are, first of all, huge in the news right now. But they are honestly one of the most metal insects around. Like so an egg is laid in a tree, it falls to the ground, this tiny little thing crawls down, finds a tree root, spends 13 to 17 years sucking on a tree root, comes out screaming, has an orgy, dies. You know, I feel like I should sing the cycle of life song here, but I mean, it's an amazing life cycle, and so it has all these questions in it, like how do they keep time, right? How do they know what time to come out? I forgot the total. I think there's like 100. I don't suppose you remember how many cicada species there are. Yes, I'm totally putting you on the spot. Okay, I think there's a lot. There's a lot of cicadas in the United States, and yet they have all diverged. And we have like cicadas that come out every year. So it's just an amazing thing, and yet what the headlines you're seeing right now are cicada apocalypse, cicada-geddon. And it's like, no, this is amazing. This is an amazing thing that these things come out, and you only get to see like this dual emergence, every couple of 100 years. That's amazing. And they don't hurt anybody. They will pee on you. But,
They're delicious.
They are delicious also, yes. And they are incredibly important in terms of the ecosystem. Like this, we know ecologically the year after a cicada emergence, that there is a huge, huge burst in a whole bunch of other animals that have fed on these cicadas. Birds do better in terms of fledging their offspring years where there are cicadas, because it's like a bonanza of food has suddenly appeared, which is why they do it. They make so many cicadas because they all come out at once. You can't eat them all. It's like Pokemon, right? You can't catch them all. So they're amazing animals, but for some reason they don't get the respect that they deserve. And I'll stop by saying their wings are beautiful.
I also just find them very relatable. Like, who among us has not wanted to like curl up underground for 16 years and just come out and scream? Like, yeah.
Especially those that have been through graduate school.
Yeah.
Excellent choices. Let's talk a little bit about writing about creepy crawlies for kids or younger audiences. So if you'll allow, I'm going to read a little bit of what Gwen recently wrote about beaded lacewing larvae. These are baby flies that stun their prey, termites, which are cockroaches, we just learned.
That one's not for kids.
Oh, sorry. Wait a minute. Oh, well, you're right. Was this Wired?
That was Wired.
Okay.
Yes, the full title, I believe, is Silent and Deadly, Fatal Farts.
Right. Okay, I got to finish this though, and then we'll pivot to your highlights pieces. Sorry. So basically, these termites release, quote, a vapor-phase toxicant from its anus. It farts on the termites. That's what that means. These farts are powerful enough to immobilize 6 termites with one blow. She's really good. This is how you wield a death fart if you are a small predatory neuropteran. It's excellent writing about insects.
I think I was on the train with one of those.
Now, more accurately, Gwen has also written for young audiences about glowworms and green weaver ants that work together to build tree houses and bridges, caterpillars that camouflage themselves as leaves or sticks to evade predators. So do you think that maybe it's easier to write about non-charismatic animals for children? We know the deficit model of educating young people and trying to counter program cultural messages doesn't really work. What are some of the things that work when writing about creepy crawlies for young people? And Bethany, you must have done some of this too. Yeah.
Actually, that's true. Yeah. Part of it also is very controlled by the venue that you're writing for. So Highlights has a very specific. They want it to be really happy and peppy. And I will say also they are fantastic to work for. They pay me on time every single time. And those of you that have done freelancing are like, Highlights are yeah. But it's actually really easy because I get to use visuals. And so if any of you have been to the new insect exhibits at AMNH, they have these incredibly beautiful, detailed macro photography shots of insects. When you look at them up close, they are actually quite beautiful. And so when you start with an image, that immediately sets up a whoa in the mind of the reader. And when it's something like the weaver ants, what was evolution doing? It's amazing. And they literally use their babies who make silk to sew giant houses in trees. And so that sort of wonder about what are these ants doing, that makes it really easy to write those stories. It is also extremely challenging to explain. So one of the other stories I did was glowworms. So explain bioluminescence at a 3rd grade level in 350 words. Go. So I actually really, really enjoy it because it's very challenging. to be able to get the information across that I want to get, but I also have to do it in really short sentences without big words.
You've had a ton of experience writing about animals, unloved ones as well, for
Yeah.
young people.
And yes, I would say that it is more challenging than writing for adults, but I do think that it has helped my writing overall. Certainly, I have found we assess the kind of grade level using various types of readability score. And in my years as a science writer, I have watched my readability score drop. And I'm very proud. I believe that the book was written overall on an 8th grade level. And I'm really proud of that, actually. Because most people do not read science at the college level. And so I actually think that in those cases, writing for children means writing for everyone, right? I actually know that when I write pieces for Science News Explorers, I have friends who have messaged me and said, hey, I'm a high school biology teacher and I was assigning pieces for kids to read and I just realized I assigned one of yours. And is it a piece that is technically written at the 6th grade level? Yes. Are they assigning it in AP biology? Yes. So, you know, I really think it is very difficult, but it is also honestly more accessible. I'm here for that.
You talked, Gwen, about trying to make sure that your pieces for highlights, that the editors are interested in highlights in upbeat, peppy stories. But not to counter that, but I just wanted to ask both of you as writers what it's like emotionally sometimes to write about some of the kind of horrifying campaigns that are underway, or really a way of life, a daily occurrence, for eradicating or eliminating animals that have been identified or subjectively, culturally identified as aversive or unwanted. This can get, I think, emotional, especially given that you are people who love cockroaches, wing patterns, and who can really get excited about cicadas. So how do you manage your emotions when writing about eradication campaigns? I felt like that might come up.
I think the hardest thing is when you are, because honestly, I'll just say, because normal people do not know how to identify insects, 2 species. A lot of what's happening with, spotted lanternfly, we absolutely need to try to eradicate that insect. But what's happening is pretty much everybody is stomping everything. And so we saw this also with the northern giant hornet, which you may also know as the murder hornet. I used to work in insect ID labs, and there's been some great papers that have come out about specimens submitted as giant hornets that were absolutely not giant hornets. And some of them were not even wasps. And so on the one hand, we have public figures of authority very rightly saying, please kill this bug, or please kill and send us your dead bug so that we can track this invasive species. But on the other hand, what you see is a lot of what's being killed is not the right animal. And that's a really hard thing, because I don't want to say, stop killing lanternflies. I mean, I will say they're actually very pretty. Unfortunately, they just can't be here. But so
they have an economic impact that's devastating. That's
exactly
the real problem. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's really hard to know how to walk that line. Other than, I think there's been some really good stories that have come out about, is it really a murder hornet? Also, the whole use of the word murder hornet is you cannot believe how much grief I have gotten for that in the entomological community. And it's like, y'all, when I say murder hornet, you know what I'm talking about, right? But if I say northern giant hornet, well played.
Different species, though.
Yeah, so it's also recognizing that you have to use the language of your audience. So yeah, I don't know how to really do that. A lot of it is, for me, the hardest part has really been dealing with, because I come from the entomological community, that means I know people that will call me up and extendedly explain to me why I was wrong to do whatever I did.
Was there another question?
Yes, hi. I was wondering, you're telling all these fabulous, weird stories and anecdotes and facts, and curious if you think that those exist for for all animals, and we're just not looking for them, or if because the way you describe these critters, they're actually quite charismatic, right? And are there non-charismatic animals that are truly non-charismatic, and are those stories worth telling, and how do we tell those if there's not like some weird thing the animal's spraying, or like it's just kind of a boring looking insect, but it is important for some other reason? Like, how do we sort of tell those stories, I guess?
You gonna tell that insect it's boring looking to its face?
What
Just
about,
saying.
I got one, face mites?
Oh, yes.
You
You
all
both wrote about face mites.
Love face mites.
I couldn't
you
believe it. They're
all
both.
have face mites. Actually, the way that they determined this was pretty hilarious. They went around putting Scotch tape on the foreheads of cadavers to collect them.
And live people. They've done studies with
Well, I was getting there, yeah.
yeah.
And so you could, for a while, you could go to a museum and they would scrape your face and you could see your own personal face mites. So poor pets. I was trying really hard to get at poor pets. So they live in your face
cute.
pores, but that did not take off.
P-O-R-E. Yeah.
P-O-R-E, yes. P-O-R-E, yes. So that is an animal that is a super hard sell, because you all have them. They are doing a job. They're supposed to be there. Honestly, I mean, your body is a wonderland. There's a bajillion things living on it. But people really do not want to know that they have mites living on them in their pores. They do not want this knowledge at all. And so that one has, because it is fascinating, we can actually see in the genetics of these mites, we can actually follow the movement of different populations across the world. Just as we can do that also with head lice. There are very distinct clades and head lice. So even that is not, yeah. But because it is a sort of story, I probably should move the mic when I did that, sorry. Stories that are horrifying in a good way, like, oh my God, you know, the giant spider webs, things like that, those still work. Those will still get readers. And if nothing else, people will learn there are things living on me and I haven't died. It's okay. They will probably never name any of their mites, though.
I will say the good news about the face mites in your face is that they do have anuses. And like, I recognize that might be weird, but there was a time in which we thought they didn't. And that they didn't have anuses and therefore they did not poop, and then they would just die and explode in your pore. Now we know that they do have anuses, so don't worry, they're regular, which I think we can all agree is a good thing. I would say there's no such thing as an animal that is fundamentally uncharismatic to me.
I agree.
Just because everything, once you get curious, once you start looking at it, it's just amazing. You know, like the multiple, many forms that life on this planet can take. Like, if you think about it too hard, you start staring off into space and looking awkward. I have difficulty thinking about it because it makes me very unapproachable. And, you know, so I think it's a matter of stoking curiosity, right? And if you are curious, your readers will be too.
There's really no such thing as a non-interesting life form, in my experience. If you think an animal or an insect or a fungus, you know, whatever, is boring, then you just haven't looked enough. I mean, I really fundamentally believe that.
Is that a good note to end on? Well, I got laughs, so I'll continue. I think maybe a final thing we could talk about is just the word pest and changing our language, and language is evolving around this. Pest control is now called, pest, yeah, we don't call it the exterminator anymore, you wrote, Bethany, we call pest control or animal control. And I just want to read some concluding words from Bethany's book. She writes, as long as we continue to live the way we do, creating new spaces and new trash. Oh, what a great message. Do not feed the animals. I finally, like the zoo sign that we all maybe grew up with, we're feeding. Okay, so as long as we continue to live the way we do, creating new spaces and new trash, bringing in new exotic pets, moving into wild spaces, or clearing ones we don't value, animals that come to take advantage of us will always be in our way. They will always bother us. There will always be pests. That I got, and Gwen, you have a piece too that says, you're never gonna get rid of bugs. In your house. Get over it. So can we talk about getting over it and a little bit to conclude here?
I would say, so the definition of pest is an animal or plant in the wrong place. So it's entirely conditional. And getting to think about why is it in this place? And why do I think it's wrong? That's something you can move a reader towards by pointing out, no, look, this is what it does. It's cool. And so getting them to think about how it's not in the wrong place. It's actually right where it should be. In your pores.
So I actually wanted to go back to some of the things that I learned from the indigenous groups that I got to learn from. There were several people who I spoke to from various nations and tribes, and they had no word for pest in their language. Their original language had no word for pest in it because, as Gwen mentioned, a pest is an animal out of place. To those people, they did not see them living apart from the environment. They were a part of the place they lived, which meant that no animal, even that animal that was bothering them, was out of place because it was in its place. You just happened to be there with it. And that, I think, is kind of the fundamental shift that could really help us all with coexistence, is the idea that we are not in charge of creating spaces where animals should not be. First of all, we can't do it. We can't. And secondly, it's not helpful for us. It doesn't serve us as people. I think it makes us rigid. I think it makes us judgmental. I think it makes us really too quick to reach for, poison solutions and then be upset when birds of prey get poisoned, right? And so I think the reframing of where we live and what we live with is what's going to help us get rid of the concept of pest in our own language.
Great. I think we'll end there. This has been a wonderful discussion and very illuminating. Thank you so much.